welcome back. And looking forward to this final discussion. So over the day, we've heard of the many opportunities around AI, all the different initiatives that are being launched and the projects and the research going on, right? And we can see clearly that these are interesting pieces when brought together can really help us realize this potential we have seen around AI, right? And so what we're going to try to do in this panel is to explore how do we realize this potential? How do we put these things together? What are the next steps? What are the concerns we should be thinking about as we put this together? And so we've got this really distinguished panel out here who's going to help us talk through that. So with that, I'm going to start by asking our panelists to introduce themselves. Let me start with you, Margaret.
Great. Let's see. My turn?
Perfect.
So I'm Margaret Busse, and I am the Executive Director of the Utah Department of Commerce, and we are the main business regulator for the state of Utah. So I know that's really exciting for folks. We have, myself and a few others about a year ago worked, Barclay Burns is in the room, worked on an approach that Utah could take for AI. There was obviously a lot of anxiety, a lot of excitement, both of those held together as after ChatGPT was first introduced to the public. And so we wanted to build something out that would be something that would meet three objectives. One, to encourage innovation in the space. We want to see that in Utah. Utah's always been very innovation friendly. Also protect the public. There are anxieties for a reason. And third, and maybe most importantly, have a function within government that can observe and learn about what's happening and be able to respond as agilely as possible. So we created the Office of AI Policy in the legislative statute this past year, and that's within our department. So that's a little bit about, I think, why I'm here, and I've learned a lot about it. I'm not a technologist. I'm more on the econ side of things, and so happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm David Danks, a professor of data science, philosophy, and policy at UC San Diego. I'm also a member of the National AI Advisory Committee, the congressionally mandated advisory group for the Biden administration at the moment, though I'm obviously here in my personal capacity, not speaking on behalf of NIAC or anything like that. And I do everything from build AI systems, principally AI systems that can reason and understand the causal structure of the world, so not merely predictive systems, but ones that can guide decisions and interventions, all the way through to understanding the ethical, societal, and policy implications of AI. So how ought we be trying to regulate AI? How can we actually have AI systems that are trustworthy and provide broad public benefit? And much of that work is grounded in trying to understand both what are the relevant values in different communities that are going to be impacted by the AI systems, so really grounding the human at the center of everything that we do, and then trying to understand the ways in which the design and development of AI systems themselves act to promote, advance, and implement some values over others, whether it's as simple as building an AI system to analyze one problem rather than another, is us saying that first problem is more important, all the way through to questions about explainability, transparency, bias, and all the sorts of fancy terms that people like to toss around. So happy to be here and excited to be learning more about what's happening with the effort here in Utah.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Susan Gregurick. I'm the Associate Director of Data Science and the Director of the Office of Data Science Strategy within the National Institutes of Health. I sit within the Office of the Director, and like many director offices, our role is to coordinate and catalyze science across our 27 institutes, centers, and offices, me particularly in data science and AI and computing. And I do that in partnership with our IC directors and with our director for the Center for Information Technology, as well as our leaders in Office of Science Policy. I also work with my colleagues at HHS on the HHS AI Task Force to develop consistent research programs and priorities across all of our, what we call optives, across HHS, as well as to communicate and facilitate policy discussions. Our NIH has a policy in AI, and that is it cannot use generative AI in the review of applications, and we can talk about why that might be. I also work across the federal government in activities such as the National AI Research Resource, which Manish actually spearheaded. And that's part of the role of government. And my role is really to coordinate and catalyze across NIH, work with other colleagues in other federal agencies, and to develop and promote research and policy for the research community.
Hello, everybody. I'm Nicholas Tatonetti. I'm professor and vice chair of computational biomedicine at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. And I would say I develop and wrangle AI and machine learning tools to do my bidding. And my bidding happens to be in how to understand the pharmacology and chemical biology of drug effects. My research passion is about trying to identify what toxic effects drugs might cause that nobody knows about and validate those prospectively and then make everyone know about them. I also play a role as Associate Director of Computational Oncology at our Cancer Center in figuring out ways to put these tools into practice across both research and practice, figuring out ways to evaluate AI tools so that we know that they work and work on our populations and can continue to evaluate them going forward, and then also integrate them from all types of different foundational models, from large language models to sequence models and others, into our research practices. So really excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. As you can see, I wasn't exaggerating. We have a really distinguished panel here. So what we're going to do is I have a few questions which I'm going to ask the panelists. And in the meantime, I request that you think about questions around realizing the potential of AI. We are going to use the same website we used in the first panel for your questions, right? And I may ask Ed and Todd, if you could put that QR code back up. Thank you. Let me start with a question for you, Nicholas, but the other panelists should feel free to chime in as well. We've heard a lot of elements of the promise of AI through the day, right? Can I ask you to summarize what you see as the transformative potential of AI moving forward?
Oh yeah, no problem. I think it's a really exciting time, especially right now, because we are venturing into a world where there is an opportunity to address problems at the scale at which we experience them. I think we're especially lucky to be in healthcare, which is beautifully complex in terms of the types of challenges that we face. But it's not one challenge anymore. Back when Google invented their great PageRank algorithm and really reinvented searching on the internet, there was one big problem that the internet had and one great solution that really opened it up. Healthcare is not so fortunate to have one great problem. It has thousands of really important problems. And those are going to require solutions at that same scale. There's no algorithms going to come in and solve everyone's problems. There's no technology you're going to buy from some company that's going to solve everyone's problems. But the really cool thing is that now more people will have access to coding. Now you can code by talking to a computer and describing what you want. Now thousands and actually hundreds of thousands of people become the AI scientists themselves, or they have the potential to. And I think with more and more people having access to technology that we in the machine learning, computer science, and informatics fields have had for the last couple of decades, I think you're going to see a lot more opportunities for innovation to be applied at the scale that we need it to actually make a change in healthcare.
Panelists would like to add?
So I see three main areas of where advances are going to happen. The first is in sort of the processing of AI, that is the infrastructure, both in the development of the necessary large-scale electric needs, the power grid needs, as well as the cooling needs. And that was a great talk by earlier panelists on climate and AI, but also on the manufacturing of new chips. There's all kinds of really great infrastructures coming out right now in training chips. These are demands on rare earths that we have to take into consideration. So, the ecology and the economies of AI and how we can impact these. This is a great area for Utah, by the way, to really think about. The second area is in AI algorithmic advances. There's really good, I was just at KDD not too long ago. There's really great ideas coming out in the integration of knowledge graphs in large language models and how we can sort of propel that to advance new language models and vice versa. So I think especially in healthcare where the integration of multiple data sets and multimodal AI could really benefit from that integration. So and that algorithmic space where I pay a lot of attention to is really exciting for me. And then there's there's sort of the policy and the awareness and the training and the teaching. And I think we just heard some great talks about how you have resources here that I imagine that others are investing in. So for me, there's three areas that are just really exciting, and I look forward to seeing where this initiative goes in maybe all of those areas.
I think one of the really interesting, we're in an interesting moment right now, I think, with AI, and it's not necessarily for the reason that gets into, The Economist or pick your favorite magazine. It's that I think we're getting close to that phase in any new technology's development and emergence where we start to discover the new capabilities that are made possible by it. Almost all technologies, when they first come out, they go through an initial phase where what they're used for is replacement, something that we've always known we could do, or maybe it was just took a lot of time and effort, and it's easier to do it now. But we're not, in some sense, getting any new capabilities. And what I think we're starting to see, and you can see this, just think about, ChatGPT comes out and what are people using it for? They're using it for, can you write an email so I don't have to do that? Or can you fix the grammar in my document? And I don't mean to disparage that. That's important. Those are important advances for a lot of people, but they're not new capabilities. And I think what we're starting to see is the emergence of some really intriguing ideas about how we could do things with AI that we have previously thought were just out of the realm of our ability to do. And some of those are really exciting. For example, in healthcare, when we look at more systemic preventive care being made possible through AI, some of it's terrifying when we think about uses for surveillance or mass manipulation of communities. And so in that sense, it's the double-edged sword we keep seeing with these technologies. But I think it's hard to forecast what the good, promising things are going to be, because I think they're going to be things that we aren't even thinking about right now in the next few years.
So I said earlier that I have an economics background, not a science background. But one of the things I think about specifically with healthcare, but I think you could probably generalize it to a lot of different industries, is that we have a lot of one of the problems, of course, of healthcare of costs, rising costs, and all of these things that we've talked about in terms of breakthroughs in science, I think may or may not reduce cost, but hopefully improve outcomes. But there's a lot of sclerosis, a lot of rent sinking, a lot of things going on in healthcare under the cover that are causing those costs to continue to rise. So recently, there's been a lot of talk about PBMs, pharmacy benefit managers. This is a tangent, but it's just an example of how these actors within the space that people don't realize are there, that are seeking, that are rent seeking and causing costs to go up. And I think AI could be used to analyze that stuff, right? To be able to go into a very, very complicated system and start to glean insight from an economic standpoint of how we actually structurally reduce costs. So I think about that with other systems like the military industrial complex, for instance, right? There's just a lot of bloat, but nobody knows exactly how to get at it because it's so complicated.
Thank you. So the other thing we heard about today, a little bit at least, is around the concerns around AI. And I know, Margaret, you think a lot about this in your role. So
we are a regulator, so we do think about this. But again, we also see the opportunity. One of the things I mentioned that we created this Office of AI Policies. Dr. Zach Boyd, who's here, is the new director. He's a mathematics professor from Brigham Young University. And it has two functions. One is to offer regulatory mitigation for companies interested in that because of all the regulatory gray areas, and also recommend policies to the legislature around areas of concern. And so there's a lot of different areas that I think about. We all know that AI is essentially powered by data and energy, right? Pretty much. That's as far as I can understand in my non-tech role. It's data and energy. And so you think about that for a moment. You think about data. We've mentioned it. You just alluded to mass manipulation. I think about this all the time. It's not so much just data privacy, right? Like, oh, we don't want you don't want your biometrics being saved on a server, your social security number or whatever it is. It's data ownership. It's everything about you that these companies can now collect in a far easier way than ever and then use potentially against you, or just use you to so you can buy more things or manipulate you. And that's what I think about a lot. I think we already see it. We've already seen it happen with social media. And so now that data collection and utility by these big tech companies is going to be on a scale we can't even imagine. And so how do we deal with that? And this is all in the context that we have not really had any kind of comprehensive federal privacy legislation. It just hasn't happened. So that's one of the things I think a lot about. On the energy side, I think we actually happen to, within the Department of Commerce, we house a division of public utilities. So we're thinking a lot about energy and the grid. And we know that these systems are going to potentially cannibalize a lot of energy. Now, maybe there's a lot of energy that we can produce. We're looking at that in the state of Utah, how we can really increase our energy production. But in the meantime, this could really cannibalize energy use. And what's interesting and almost ironic is it feels to me like the future is more energy at work and fewer people. Kind of interesting. If energy is one that's doing the work for us and not as many people. So that's a really interesting thing to think about. So I think about those two things a lot. And then there's, of course, transparency issues that we all are familiar with, people being deceived, those kinds of things that we think a lot about as well. So lots of cool things and lots of concerns.
Absolutely. So maybe this is a question for you, David. Given that we're working on trying to realize that transformative potential, given these concerns, are there governance structures that can be set up to help us address this in a responsible way?
Yes, there are. So, and I'm sorry that there's not federal privacy legislation. That's the California delegation's fault. Long story there. So when we think about with technology, especially AI, and I really appreciate, Manish, that you used the word governance there, not just the word regulation. There are many ways that we can govern a system, govern a technology, which is to say, steer it towards the outcomes that we want rather than the ones that we don't want. And that's everything from, on the one hand, regulation. It sometimes is said that there's no AI regulation in the United States, which is actually quite wrong. There's an enormous amount of AI regulation in the US. It just happens by way of agencies that focus on particular sectors. So the Food and Drug Administration regulates AI in medical devices. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission regulates the use of AI in hiring in the sense that it can lead to discrimination, right? So there absolutely is regulation in the US. It's sector specific. There is sector general regulation coming in to effect in the European Union over the next 2 years in the form of the AI Act. So there are regulations, but there's also standards. This morning in Elam Tabasi's talk, she talked a lot about standards creation. And standards play a critical role in the regulation and governance of technologies. That's how most actually of the cybersecurity yes, cybersecurity is not great. Things get hacked all the time. But to the extent that there is governance of cybersecurity, a lot of it happens through standards, not through law. There are best practices, the things that we are teaching our students, and I'm sure you here at Utah are teaching your students about how to just do it the right way the first time, rather than them learning one way of building an AI system and then they have to go back. And I think one of the things that binds together all of these different governance mechanisms, almost all of them, I should say, is that they're becoming more and more human-centered. They're more and more focused on what are the human outcomes that we want to make sure that we are protecting, rather than what are the technical outcomes that we're trying to guarantee. And that's a big shift, I think, for a lot of people in the governance community, because they're used to thinking about things like the governance of the braking system in your car, which is, on a dry pavement going from this speed, you must be able to stop in this distance. It's very technical, technology centered. And one of the things that has taken, I think, a few years, but is starting to happen in the AI space, is that the governance of AI systems is increasingly moving towards a human-centered, community-centered focus in terms of the outcomes that we care about, rather than a technological-centered focus. But it's going to be a lot of work for us to get to that. And it's going to happen at every level. It's not just federal, it's not just our students, it's also state. Utah has been a leader in starting to think about how to govern AI systems. California, just recently, Governor Newsom signed into law a bill, a couple of them, that will do a lot with governing AI systems. And we'll see where we get. These are difficult. It's hard to get regulation and governance right, especially when the technology is moving faster than we are. And so we're constantly playing catch up, but I think we're making real progress.
Margaret, do you have a state perspective on this?
Well, I'll just tell you a little bit about what we're working on right now. I mentioned the Office of AI Policy, and one of the roles is to focus on areas where we can make recommendations, meaningful recommendations to the legislature. So as I mentioned, we just got this office up and running, and we actually decided, well, let me actually mention the other part of the law that was already passed. The law that created the Office of AI Policy also contained some provisions around disclosure. So it basically requires for AI chatbots, text bots, voice bots that are generatively AI powered to disclose whether or not they're human or not, well, they're not human. So disclose that you're not human, and so and then for sort of lower risk, essentially require if somebody asks, you don't have to disclose up front, but if somebody asks, are you human or not? You have to answer honestly. So that was just a very light approach, regulatory approach, just to sort of get started, knowing that that's where a lot of consumers are interfacing with generative AI right now, is with these chatbots and voice bots. So now with this new office, we decided to focus our first kind of policy area on generative AI in mental health specifically. We thought that would be a rich area for us to kind of explore, because there's all sorts of interesting questions. There's lots of chatbots, new products that are sort of either directly in this space or they're around the edges in terms of advising, coaching people. And there's some interesting questions. So right now, we actually regulate people that are in mental health, right? If you're a therapist, your psychologist, your social worker, all those people are regulated by the state. So if a chatbot gets into that space, what happens? Do we go after the chatbot for unregulated practice, right? That's kind of weird. We don't do that. It's also, we don't really quite think of it as a medical device either. It's different. And so what's the way, how do you regulate that? And there are risks. There's data privacy risks. You're really sharing intimate details about your life potentially with these chatbots. And there are also risks about just sort of hallucinations or just harmful recommendations. I just read a story today, I think, somebody saying, well, should I just jump off the cliff? I'm really distressed. And the answer was, that sounds like a really great way to get both some physical and mental relief. And it was just like, well, wow. And so, there's some kinks that need to be worked out. And so we think that's going to be a rich area for us to focus on, that will also allow us to understand more broadly, how do we deal with licensure in general, now that these chatbots can mimic humans, and data privacy and so forth.
Thank you. So the other thing that came around in realizing the potential of AI is partnerships between public, private, industry, government, academia. Susan, can you please comment from your perspective, how do we realize that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the really exciting things about being here today is the fact that you have what looks to me like strong partnership and buy-in from your state government. And so that might be somewhat unique. I'm not entirely sure, but it's clear that there's a lot of real interest in the government and the citizenry of Utah in AI. Let me tell you about one of the things that we're doing to incentivize activities just like this to really bring the communities and the research and the academics together is through a partnership called Aim Ahead. It's a partnership that brings communities from under-resourced areas and rural areas with experts in AI to develop algorithms or infrastructure or training to really promote AI and the adoption in these rural or underserved communities. A particular example is in a community that serves Hispanic kids. So generally kids who are in elementary school are really excited about STEM, that it's not hard to get them really excited about what's happening in science, but we lose them about junior high school. And once we lose them, it's really hard to recapture them. It's particularly true in underserved populations and minority populations. So the program Aim Ahead works with teachers, in particular junior high schools, to not only do exactly what we saw today in the resource, in the teaching resource to how to train the trainers essentially to bring AI to the classroom, but it works with these kids in an after school program, and they do what's called co-design. They work with uh, coders and software developers that are funded through the Aim Ahead program to develop essentially a chatbot that helps sort of these kids interact and ask questions. But they're in there, they're learning Python, they're learning Shiny. It's really remarkable. They're totally engaged. They haven't forgot what they loved about science. And that's our way to hopefully get them to the next stage in high school where they will continue their interest and their love of AI. But it's equally rewarding for the software developers because they get to work with kids and they see in action what they're doing, and that co-design is something that I'd love to give the seed here. I think those partnerships with your communities, you talked a little bit about the farmers and the ranchers who really rely on the data from the climate studies, and that they're impacted by this. I'm sure that they would love to be a part of co-design here. So for me, it's really about working with communities to embed the concepts of AI right from the start. I think we heard this earlier. You start at the beginning, developing not only the policies, but also working with the communities. And then finally, I'll just put a plug in for the National AI Research Resource. I think Utah has a lot to offer for all of us. I work with all of our federal agencies led by NSF in developing those resources for researchers, not just full professors, but I've got a number of assistant professors just starting out in their career getting near pilots. So I'd love to see more Utah engagement there as well.
Thank you, Susan. We do have some questions come in, so let me read the first one, which is about data. And this is a reminder, please, there's a QR code up on the screen. Please put in your questions. So the first one is around data. It says, how are you and your institutions thinking about ethical responsibilities to the individuals' constituents that supply the data needed for these models, especially if there are commercial implications of those models? Right. So the question is about, how do you address different concerns around data and sharing of data?
I could definitely take this. I spend an awful lot of time on this because it's really important for NIH since we hold an enormous number, maybe over 330 petabytes of data on the cloud. Most of it is human data, genomics data, survey data, imaging data. All of it's healthcare related in some form or another, either clinical trial or from an EHR. And protecting that data privacy is paramount. But what we're moving into is a world where we permission data. That means that patients and participants tell us, much like they do in all of us, how they would like their data to be used and in what way. And in that way, we can provenance that data and understand how we use it for AI and when we don't, because really we have to start to think about the patient in the loop of AI. So this is something that we've been working on, and it's a priority of Dr. Bertinelli. So I spend a lot of time on it, but it's fully worth it. The other thing I'll put out there as a challenge is that when we're training large language models or even small language models on patient data, that data is controlled access, meaning you can't just get it in the open resource. You have to actually go through a fairly serious amount of rigor in order to get access to that data. We can't put that data set out there as a training data set. It is controlled access data, nor can we even, we worry, put the weights of the training algorithms out in there for fear that it might re-identify. So we have a real policy concern that you guys could help us with, which is what do we do when you're developing and training AI algorithms on patient data, and how do we uphold the standards that we want to have transparency and trustworthiness of AI and show provenance, but we also want to respect the wishes and the privacy of the individual. I think this is a grand challenge for somebody like Utah to take on. I'm going to pass it over here to David. I think he might want to reflect.
I mean, I think, one of the answers to some of that is actually taking advantage of the ability to generate synthetic data. So especially in the patient and healthcare realm, synthetic data, I think, has enormous promise. Not for some weird, Oribus snake eating its tail, problem of trying to improve the models, but to make it so that we can democratize access to realistic data. Because one of the challenges we have with data is, on the one hand, there are commercial and privacy reasons to restrict access, but you pointed to the NAIR pilot. As one of the real goals of the NAIR is supposed to be democratizing access to AI. How do we have tribal colleges? How do we have small businesses? How do we have community colleges being able to contribute to AI innovation? And we're not going to do that by just throwing a bunch of data out there and walking away. And so I think synthetic data has a real is an underexplored, it's not unexplored, but underexplored way of addressing some of those worries.
Let me just speak to what we were just talking about right before the panel, which is this interesting dichotomy of where health data is there's extra caution around. And of course, the benefits of being able to analyze it are huge to humankind, whereas data that's collected about, my spending habits and your spending habits there's not a lot of caution, and it's just grab everything. And the utility of that is actually not that helpful to us. And so there's an irony there that we need to kind of work out. I think, if I'm a consumer or I'm a patient, if I can see that my data going into some huge database, especially if it's turned into a synthetic data, for the benefit of myself and mankind, I'm much more willing to give up that data. So I love what you're talking about in terms of permissions. I think that's incredibly important. And I think that Zach, Dr. Boyd and I have talked a lot about how we could maybe innovate here in Utah on clearing some regulatory pathways that happen to exist on the state level.
I'll just chime in just to throw some salt, pepper into the mix, maybe. I'm not a fan of synthetic data. And the reason is because I think you kind of said not to talk about the problem of the snake eating its tail, but I don't think there's really a way around that right now. I do think it's worth exploring, but unless we can make synthetic data set where you could discover biological truths from, you could push the envelope of knowledge by analyzing the synthetic data set, which I think we are very far from being able to do, then you end up in a system much like the one we have. You're just perpetuating the same system. There's those of us who have access to the data that can drive discoveries, and then there's everybody else who doesn't. So I really think that other opportunities to be able to use differential privacy, maybe to release data model parameters, but in a way that can guarantee mathematically guarantee a level of privacy, not perfect privacy, but at least you have some boundaries on it. Are probably a much better way to move forward, where we can actually give other people access and they can push the knowledge forward as well.
I think that does make a lot of sense. One area I've seen synthetic data used very effectively is around natural disaster prediction. For example, early earthquake warning, right? There isn't enough real data that they can build models around. So how do you build meaningful? But that's a different
Can
problem.
I just jump on that?
Yeah.
Okay,
And all of you.
Yeah.
that is a great example, because when you can generate so-called synthetic data from a set of first principles, So for here, we understand enough about the Earth, the geology of the Earth, and we have very good models of it. But we just don't have examples because we only have one Earth and we're only living a very short time on the scale of geology. So if we could have another Earth and we have the model to model another Earth, then that adds enormous value. Then you're not just generating synthetic data of that's statistical in nature. You're generating it from first principles. That has a lot of potential and power.
I agree. So here's another question. It's around underserved communities, right? There are many domains in which humans are underserved. For example, mental health services or high quality tutoring. How do you think about the risks of not acting to improve services that may not be perfectly prevent error or harm, just to improve accessibility?
So I think that that question is getting at a really important issue, which is what is the relevant baseline for comparison? As an example, I'll move out of mental health because I don't know the statistics on that. It's on the order of 30,000 people a year die in vehicular accidents in the United States. What standard do we hold autonomous vehicles to? It had better not be that they never cause an accident, because that's just not plausible. Is it, that if everybody used autonomous vehicles, it'd be 29,999 die a year? Well, that doesn't seem like a good idea either. And so we need to think about what is it that we think is good enough, and where do we think that it's worth the risk of introducing AI systems? Because of course there's a kind of risk of increased variance whenever we bring a new technology into a system. And I think that's going to be a really domain specific kind of question to ask. I don't think it's in some things. I think it's where's human performance? If we can get incrementally better, let's do it. In other cases, I think we're going to say, no, it's important to have humans in the loop, to have humans involved in case something goes wrong. And so we're going to have a much higher bar for the use of AI. One further complicating factor that I'll toss in, it actually was alluded to in one of the morning sessions, is what's sometimes called Jevons paradox, Jevons, which is when you make something more efficient, the demand for it outstrips the efficiency gains. You're all familiar with this, which is adding lanes to freeways. If you add a lane to a freeway, you actually have higher congestion 6 months later than you had beforehand, because people change their behaviors. And we should expect that this is going to happen. If suddenly lots and lots of people can have access to mental health care through an AI chatbot, the demand for mental health care is going to go up. And so we have to be careful not just to look for, small improvements in, the rates or the relative accuracy, because if we also increase the demand significantly enough, we might have just in absolute numbers a lot more harms. So I think I'm sorry I can't give a clean answer, right? I wish I could say, oh, it's baseline minus an epsilon percent, but it's going to depend. And unfortunately, that means computer scientists, those of us who build AI systems, are the wrong people to set those baselines. It needs to be people who understand the domain, understand the communities in which these systems might be deployed, and can reason through the likely impacts.
I think that example is so good, the autonomous vehicle one. And because honestly, you could say that having the same amount of accidents could be great, because then you get all this extra time. Like if I used to live in New York City and I miss the fact that I could take the subway and I could read books. I read a lot of books while I lived in New York City. And so it'd be nice to continue reading books even if I have to take a car, right? So the added benefit to society could be worth even no change in efficiency. But the cool thing even more is mapping that to healthcare, where we have the whole spectrum of possible problems, from things that are just making life easier, even if it's the same efficiency, would be very welcomed and worth a lot, to ones where it would have to be so much better. Nobody wants to replace that human connection with their doctor completely for all of their healthcare. Maybe for this or that, they're not too worried about it. But if it comes to the serious thing, no one wants to get their cancer diagnosis from a bot. And so that's where it would have to be extraordinary, and in fact, probably very unlikely to ever be implemented. But are there other things that we could do to support that cancer doctor and that patient in that situation? For sure. I just appreciate that analogy.
Yeah. So here's a question. It's specifically for you, Susan, but I think it has a broader thing, and that's around challenges related to the access of data.
There are definitely challenges when looking for access to patient-related data uh, that we are addressing through new and improved efficiencies through NIH and through my office in partnership with the Center for Information Technology and the National Library of Medicine. Still, we understand that there are still challenges to getting access to patient data. One of the nice things that working with Dr. Bertinelli is her attention to patient data and healthcare improvements, that I think that we'll see, rapid increases in improving data access, but also improving high quality data from healthcare environments that eventually will instantiate the concept of patient permissioning. That is our goal for sure. With that, we feel like these can power AI. They could potentially be used to create large scale synthetic data, understanding that's still a research area. That does eliminate a lot of our challenges with data access. We're also looking at other ideas such as blockchain and differential privacy with respect to patient data. I think that this is a great opportunity for Utah because you guys are a computer science, mathematics, and STEM powerhouse. So this is where we could really look to you. Also, just going to put in a plug here that one of the challenges we have is not just misinformation, but also unknown information when training large language models, and the concepts of uncertainty quantification is a strength here, but I suspect the mathematics is needing more further development. So I'm looking forward to discussing those with you as well.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think, to add into this, the sense in which I think Utah as a university, less about the state here, but as a university could be very well positioned is that one kind of, to make a call back to this morning, public-private partnership is actually to have public institutions that can act as clearinghouses for data in sectors and areas where kind of everybody in every private entity knows they really need to share the data to have everybody do better, but nobody wants to share the data with each other. And so having a neutral third party that can maintain the security of the data, ensure the privacy of it, whether it's in manufacturing, pharmaceutical development, various aspects of finance. There's a real need for entities that can be sort of a trusted safe space for the data that can advance the sector without endangering the competitive advantages that each individual company has. So I think I would suggest maybe explore some of that because I think there's opportunities
If I
for
could
you
just
here.
add on, we're actually exactly in line with what you're thinking. If you look at the airline industry, this is exactly what they did. And the improvement in efficiency and the reduction of crashes is tremendous. We can do that in healthcare. Absolutely.
So Penny's telling me we are running out of time. And
Don't blame Penny for that.
so I'm going to use this last question and also ask our panelists to sort of give their closing wisdom to the audience as the realizing the potential. So the question says, you've thought more deeply about AI than most of us. What are things that you're generally concerned about, or what is it that keeps you up at night? Right.
Okay. So what keeps me up at night is, so I'll give a little bit of a roundabout answer, right? So I spend half my time in a philosophy department. That's where my PhD is. So everyone assumes that I'm interested in what's called superintelligence or artificial general intelligence. Think HAL from 2001, right? That the robots are going to kill us all, and that doesn't scare me at all. When people ask, "Are you worried about robots killing us all?" I say no. What terrifies me is not that the AI is going to kill us. It's that the AI is going to make it so much easier for us to kill each other. I worry so much more about the humans than I do about the AI. And in particular, what I worry about is as AI becomes more and more a part of our lives, that we're going to lose what sometimes would be called like situational awareness. We're going to lose the ability to engage with other human beings. We're going to be deceived because the AI is going to say, well, here's how things work. And we're going to go, okay. And we're just going to go on with our lives, but the AI will have made a mistake or won't have recognized that the context has shifted in a really important way. I was in a meeting with somebody, this was about 2 years ago, who was had been involved in the nuclear weapons arsenal for the US government. And this person just confidently asserted that no AI would ever be involved in a decision to launch nuclear weapons. And I said, oh, that's great to hear. So how would that decision be made? And they'd say, oh, the human would do it on the basis of the intelligence that they're provided and their insight. I said, where do you think that intel's coming from? Right? And that's the thing that keeps me up at night. Not that the AI is going to push the button, but that a human is going to so completely believe that what's coming from the AI that they're going to lose the ability to do anything to make a smart decision, right? It's the society scale version of the person who, how many of you now when you back up your car, how many people look in their rear view mirror as opposed to the little screen, right? And what happens when that screen fails? That's the world I worry we might be creating for ourselves. And that's what keeps me up at night. How do we make sure we don't lose the human wisdom, human insight, and human values that really should be ultimately guiding everything?
Maybe to make sure we also, in the positive note, we also add what excites you the most.
Let me think about that. You can come back to it.
Yeah, okay.
Well, I agree with you, David. Those are some of the things. I don't feel like there's this existential risk so much with the AI itself. Like we humans can still choose, but it's the choices that I get concerned about, because I do think our ability to be agents unto ourselves, our actual agency, is going to be compromised as we sort of slouch towards this kind of panopticon society. And we're going to have to figure out how to reckon with that. I think that's going to be a really interesting part of what happens in our society for the next 10 years and certainly beyond. I remember there was a bit of a movie clip, and I don't even know what the movie was, where somebody said, there was a question and they said, I don't know the answer. And the person said, why don't you Google it? And the person said back, let's just not know. And I think about that all the time, because we have gotten to a point where we always can know everything. But again, is it really knowing? Do we really know that that's accurate? And so that's what I worry about. The thing that I'm hopeful about is love the collaboration going on. I love what Responsible AI University of Utah is doing. It was so interesting to hear the progress they've made. And I do think we have a unique partnership here with our Office of AI Policy on sort of the regulatory policy making side, that we can work with legislators to make things happen quickly, much quicker than it happens in Congress. And so that's really exciting.
Yeah.
I can quickly give my positive because it'll build on that. The positive would be, AI is not a hurricane bearing down on us. AI is us. We build AI. We make the choices about what we're going to build. And that means that we have agency and possibility. And it's efforts like this one that actually give me a lot of optimism, that there are people who are passionate and care and have the technical expertise and the resources to show a better way, that we don't have to just use AI for, serving better ads, right? That's the old joke. Facebook took some of the most brilliant people in the world and put them to work figuring out how to show me better ads. And we can do better, and I'm optimistic that we will.
So what keeps me up at night and what I work on quite a bit is just making sure that in this era where the technology advances, and we certainly are living in an information and technology era, are not equally felt across all of our country, and that we're leaving people behind and people that we shouldn't leave behind, and that this will have downstream implications, maybe not even too far in the future. So I work really hard at looking for ways to increase the capabilities and the research opportunities for everybody. But I do focus a lot on underserved and unrepresented and rural communities, because I do worry a lot about the divergent of our population in their technology savvy and just in their science savvy. And if you don't think this doesn't have an impact, just look where we are in our country right now when we're thinking about our future makeup of our Congress. So this does have a big impact on us. And so I do worry a lot about it. But what excites me is the excitement I see in young researchers and students, because they have a spark in them, and it's just needing to be lit. And that's the role of NIH, is to provide those resources to sustain research. And so that's one of the benefits of being on the funder side, is that you can really grow people's careers in meaningful ways. So that's, and for me, it's AI and data science, but I could bring in my colleague Dory Zook, and she would be genetics and cell biology. It's the same. That's really what the people who go into government, they have a passion for service to the country. So that's what excites me.
For time efficiency, I'm going to make the thing that keeps me up at night and what I'm most excited about the same thing. And that's the opportunity that we have to make our connections more human. And I think about this a lot in healthcare, and about how we can take all this technology and we can make the process of going to the doctor or getting cared for more about the human to human connection and less about the computer screen separating you from your doctor taking notes. And I think that's true across the board in art and in music and in science. There's an opportunity to make the human connections the focal point when we have technology this amazing. And it's our opportunity to take advantage of that.
Thank you. I know there were a lot of questions we didn't get to, so thank you for all the questions. Let's join me in thanking our panelists.